Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much. So my name is Robert. I've been working on systems here at the college. We've been developing it into our program since about 2011. We've been laddering successive projects onto other successive projects. And I think that we're doing really well, and we're really happy to make links with Canadian Forces College Toronto, and as well as all other areas with Global Affairs Canada and Privy Council, all of these, as well as academia, where these concepts are occurring. So my personal journey started with international relations with a focus on international development. So I was exposed to dependency theory and exposed also working in Guatemala to a particular wicked problem. At this point, after the fact, discovering systems theory, wicked problem theory, complexity theory, my experience made sense. I had found a framework, a methodology that could incorporate a whole bunch of complexities that I had seen and experienced, but not necessarily knew how to explain. So I think it's particularly important for our current era, defined by accelerating complexity, in terms of interpreting changing global realities. So very roughly, I think it allows us to think in nuances and appreciates subtleties, evolution and change. We can bring in emerging concepts into our own understandings, our own realities, such as heterarchy. It can show interdependence of causality. It can illuminate blind spots. For example, recently, we've discovered that the Women, Peace, and Security agenda is critically important to understanding how we understand security writ large. So we can also appreciate and learn from relational experiences. As we interact within our own system with other systems, we can incorporate that relational knowledge. And then we have a methodology, concepts to make sense of emergent properties, non-linearity, non-additive effects, counterintuitive effects, and the fact that we're consistently surprised by events that have occurred, starting with, most recently, I would say the Arab Spring, Crimea, and a whole bunch of other difficult phenomena that are difficult to explain using traditional means. So at first, early sources that we looked at were Peter Senge, von Bertalanffy, Bill Bentley, Peter Checkland, Matthew Lauder from DRDC. Further on, we came across Bill Bentley's monograph, We Murder to Dissect, bringing it to John Schmidt, then the SAM School, their methodology, Ben Zweibelson, and a host of other writings. So now it's interesting going back and discovering how there's similar writings across all these other fields. And so we can consistently trip into a new academic world and discover more and more readings. It's very interesting. Next slide, please. So this explains what we do within our professional development courses here at the SID Institute. We ladder experiences beginning with the Intermediate Leadership Program, ILP. So we have a residential lecture where we discuss complexity of operations, what makes operations complex. We don't actually come out and formally directly label these things, but we use complexity theory concepts. So it's an indirect approach. On the Master Warrant Officer, we have a specific direct reading on systems concepts, systems theory, explaining what are wicked problems, what are complex adaptive systems, and why they're generally important operationally, as well as in terms of institutional management. On the senior leadership program for our chief warrant officers, we build again on this previous understanding of the concepts and introduce the design framework. Because we want chiefs or NCMs generally to be aware of, they may hear this language and not understand what it is, what its relevance is. So we can introduce this concept so that NCMs will be more cognizant within their relationships within the broader institution. Next slide, please. Okay, so what do? We look at wicked problems. I know it's been a buzzword for a few years now, but the key concepts of wicked problems still have not changed. They still exist. We're still dealing with them in what our emerging security environment has for us. And then we move to say systems theory. What are the origins of it? Why is it important? Specifically complex adaptive systems as human systems open to external environments and the effects and behavior they involve. We do this through andragogy. We want to build upon, for our senior NCMs, previous learning and experience they have, because they have a vast amount of experience. They are very intelligent and capable, having been in many operational environments. And so we want to build on that experience and learning and make it and approach it in language that can be understood. We definitely want to empower further learning. We're limited in terms of space. We only have one particular residential day, but we want to invite our population to become curious and want to learn more and to pursue learning on their own way independently. We use the Army design methodology through SAMs, and we do a design activity based on Boko Haram. Boko Haram has been good because of its evolving complexity. Each iteration we do, the situation has completely changed, or not completely, but it has evolved. And as Canadians, we generally do not know that much about Nigeria, and it also develops a good transferable knowledge that can be used for other failed and failing states, similar to where the CAF will be deployed into. All right, so some of the challenges that we experience are just the constraints of the program. We don't have a lot of time. Early on, there was some resistance in the fact that not a lot of CAF members had heard of these concepts or had experience using it. Design was not really heard of. And just connecting with the audience. It's generally an audience demographic that has not been to university, but they're incredibly intelligent. So we have to translate the information into a form that makes sense and activates new learning. Next slide, please. So this is what, out of one day, our design approach, this is a typical output of what we would see from it. And each group, each iteration brings something new, dynamic, creative, and it's really excellent. But this is something typical, so we do a systemic, rich picturing, putting on actors, looking at interrelationships between actors, trying to define processes. And each iteration, the wisdom is surprising. And I attribute that to the diversity of people in the group and the emergent property that allows for. Okay, next slide, please. So why are we learning this at all? Well, it's because things are incredibly complex. Our normal models to explanatory models are not sufficient. We need to adopt new methodologies, and it needs to be not just from one discipline, but we need to include everywhere that has something to say. So we can see that Crimea caused a lot of surprise. The persistent problems, such as Boko Haram, as well as the huge elephant in the room, climate change and all of its related consequences, and as well as how technology is changing our societies. It's changing how we make decisions, how we think, how we interact with one another. Because the security environment is extremely complex, no one authority knows what is entirely going on. Everyone has a piece of the truth based on their particular experience. Simplistic, reductionist, binary, linear explanations do exist, but they lack an explanatory power. And so we need to move forward collaboratively, and we need new cognitive tools. We are working in an environment that is very hard to predict. And so understanding of complex adaptive systems, of systems theory, of wicked problems, and all of these other related issues can help us. They can help us improve our understanding. They can help us improve how we design to actually interact with them. Next slide, please. So here we can see that data, just the fact that data is increasing exponentially in our societies. We're producing so much data that we are overloaded, we cannot make sense of it. And so we have this high data, low knowledge, as Ben was saying. So this is a massive problem. It's affecting our decision making. It's slowing us down because we're aware of more and more factors. It's also causing confusion as we don't know what's true anymore. We don't know what's manipulation. We don't know what is not true. Okay, next slide, please. So why teach this to NCMs? We had an excellent introduction as to why, the rationale of why we do this from the Canadian Chief Warrant Officer this morning. I just want to make the argument it's because the organization, the CAF, is made up quantitatively of a huge mass of NCMs. You're looking at between 75 and 80% of NCMs. They will experience, hear, feel, interact with the local population. They will be frontline experiencing complexity. They will accumulate much wisdom over iterative experiential learning, trying, testing, and developing strategies that work, many times informally and independently. And I make the analogy here to Boxer. So in Animal Farm, in George Orwell's Animal Farm, there was this Boxer had a role. He was the manual labor. But the revolution of the animals would not have been possible without Boxer. He supplied the heavy lifting, the heavy labor, and he won the battle. So I would suggest that the cognitive divide that we have in essentially having NCMs as executors of policy and the officers as decision makers, that this cognitive divide, I would say that complexity is so prominent now that we need to encourage and empower and harness the potential that NCMs have to be thinkers for the benefit of the entire aggregate institutional output. So we know that the NCM trade has come to know more and more task diversity. Our demographic is also more and more educated and technologically savvy than before. And we know that their actions on the ground have strategic consequences, whether people are aware of it or not. Their behavior, whether it's a smile or the improper use of force, has a consequence, understanding all of these concepts. And so they will be directly changing the problem as they interact with it. So we need more NCMs to be more than just workers. We need them to think, to make localized decisions within a strategic framework, because they play important leadership and institutional management roles as well. All right, and my last point is that Malcolm Gladwell recently did a podcast called My First 100 Million. And he talks about how weak link theory in economics means that if you strengthen the weakest links, your output is a lot better. And he uses the analogy of the difference between soccer as a game and basketball. And he says basically that if we strengthen the weakest soccer players, your team becomes immensely more productive than if you improve your basketball team. So I think that this economic theory has an important parallel with our demographic. Next slide, please. And so here at the Outside Institute, we definitely want to ensure that we're connecting and relevant to the greater institution. We want our message to be resonating and in line with what else is going on, so that the military, that the role that NCMs play will be that much more efficient in whole government approach, et cetera. So thank you very much.